When they arrived at Bethsaida, some people brought a blind man to Jesus, and they begged him to touch the man and heal him. Jesus took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. Then, spitting on the man's eyes, he laid his hands on him and asked, "Can you see anything now?" The man looked around. "Yes," he said, "I see people, but I can't see them very clearly. They look like trees walking around." Then Jesus placed his hands on the man's eyes again, and his eyes were opened. His sight was completely restored. He could see everything clearly. Jesus sent him away, saying, "Don't go back into the village on your way home."
I think the batteries are dead, Brighton. You want to come get this and put some new batteries in it? Or somebody take it back there for him? All right. All right. Well, everybody have a good Christmas? Oh, man, you guys, did you not have a good Christmas? You have a good Christmas? All right, okay, man. Tell you what, my Christmas was good. I ate way too much food and got way too many sweets. And fat and sassy, that's right, yes, absolutely. But I hope, how many people are bringing some chili tonight? How many people are bringing some chili tonight? All right. We got quite a few people. Dad, you're not using my recipe, are you? Okay, good. I was like, because I gave my dad my recipe because he asked for it one time, and I was like, you better not be using my recipe. All right. You changed it. Oh, okay. All right. Anyway, all right. Well, we're going to have a good time tonight. We're going to meet up tonight from 6 to 9, have some chili, and there is a gift for first place. So just come prepared, and, if you can beat me, congrats, But I think I have a pretty good chili recipe that I like it. I've been perfecting over the last few years. So anyways, all right. So there's been a few cases of mistaken identity over the last several years, actually over the course of history. And I actually Googled this, and there was a top 10, and I think the one that I want to share with you this morning was actually number 7. So there was, on April of 2006, a man by the name of Robert Spencer was driving a semi, and he fell asleep at the wheel, and he crashed into a Taylor University van carrying 9 students and faculty. Some of you may remember that story. I remember reading about this story. And there was 4 students and 1 staff member that passed away in that accident. And Robert Spencer was actually charged with something, and he actually went to prison. But one of the most shocking parts of this story was that there was a girl who had passed away in the wreck. Her name was Laura Van Ryn, but her body was actually mistaken for Whitney Sirik. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly or not, but Whitney actually had a really bad head injury, and so her head was bandaged, and she was in a coma. But somehow the IDs got mixed up in the crash, and so Whitney's family buried Laura's body, thinking that it was Whitney, and then Laura's family watched over Whitney for several weeks, waiting for her to recover. And the mix-up was discovered about 5 weeks later when Laura, quote-unquote, awoke, and she said, "Well, I'm actually Whitney." You can imagine just the unimaginable shock for both families at that moment, right? To mistake somebody's identity is significant, especially in a case like this. This mistaken identity impacted families in ways that we can't even imagine, right? It impacted a student body in a way that we can't imagine. And what we're going to talk about today is actually mistaken identity. But this is a mistaken identity that affects everything, okay? It affects everything. So if you've been reading with us through the book of Mark over the last several months, Jesus' identity has been a point of contention throughout the entire gospel story. People have been trying to figure this out. Everybody wants to know who Jesus is, and you can imagine just how significant this is, right? Because here comes this guy, and he's casting out demons. He's touching people and healing them. He's doing all kinds of crazy stuff. He's feeding people with just some, a few loaves and some fish, and he feeds 5,000 people with that, right? I mean, this guy is just blowing everybody's mind, and everybody's trying to figure out, who is this? Right? Who is this? Because there have been moments in time in the past with God's people where there have been amazing things happening. But the people who brought about those amazing things were not the Son of God, Jesus, the Son of God, right? They were prophets. They were people that were used by God. And so everybody's trying to figure out who Jesus is. And Jesus himself is not allowing people to say who he is. Have you noticed that through the Gospel of Mark? Whenever he heals somebody, he says, don't tell anybody. Or when demons are shouting out, you're Jesus, the Son of God, he's like quiet, and he doesn't let them talk. Right? And that just continues on because, and we're going to figure it out a little bit more as we step into the story today. So we just had read for us, Matthew read, hopefully you heard it, you at least saw it on the screen. But we just had read for us this story about a blind man who's getting healed. But the way it happens is kind of weird and different, right? It's just kind of weird. First of all, it's gross. I mean, Jesus spits on the guy's eyes. I mean, that's gross, right? If COVID was a thing back then, Jesus probably would have gotten arrested or something like that. Like he spits on the guy's eyes. It's just really disgusting. Okay, but then he lays his hands on the guy, and he asks him, "Can you see?" And the guy's like, "Well, sorta. I see people walking around, but they look like trees." And you're like, well, that didn't work, right? And so then Jesus lays his hands on the guy's eyes again, and he is completely restored. And so I've read this story many times in my life, and I always ask myself the same question: Did Jesus fail at healing, and then he had to redo it? like what? Like, did he mess up? And the answer is, I don't think so. I don't think so, because I think Jesus is actually making a point about how his disciples see him. Like, he's actually illustrating through his healing of this blind man how his disciples are seeing him. You see, the story of the failed healing is a demonstration of how the disciples see Jesus, because they're seeing him a little bit. They're understanding a little bit about who he is, but they don't completely get it. And we're going to see how much they don't get it as we continue reading in this story. So if you're taking notes, you might want to write that down. This is only going to be on the screen for a second. The story of the failed healing is a demonstration of how the disciples see Jesus. All right, so let's keep reading verse 27. Jesus and his disciples left Galilee, and they went up to the villages near Caesarea Philippi. As they were walking along, he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" "Well," they replied, "some say you're John the Baptist, who, remember, passed away. Some say," or actually was killed, I should say, executed. "Some say you're Elijah. Others say you are one of the prophets." But then he asked them, "But who do you say I am?" And Peter replied, "You are the Messiah." But Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. Now, remember, we've talked about this word before as we've been in this series. Messiah means the anointed king. Christ is the Greek version of Messiah, which is the Hebrew translation of the same word. Basically, it's the anointed king, right? And this is the first time in the gospel that Jesus is identified by a human being as the king. This is the first time. Everybody else has just been like, who is this guy, right? How is he controlling the wind and the waves? How is he healing all these people? How is he teaching with all this authority? And this is the first time in Mark's gospel that somebody identifies that Jesus is the Messiah. In other words, he's not just announcing the kingdom of God. He is the king of the kingdom, right? He is the king of the kingdom of God, right? He's the Messiah. And this is a dangerous message, right? It's a dangerous message. Because if somebody starts to go around claiming that they're the king, but you're in an empire known as the Roman Empire, and there's already an emperor, and he hasn't approved your kingship, then you're not allowed to say that you're the king. You know, Herod was the king of Judea. He was allowed to say he was the king because he was underneath the Roman emperor. But Jesus didn't have that approval. And so if he starts to claim that he's a king, that's a capital offense. People who claim that they are king in this time period are killed. They are executed. They are crucified. So you get a little bit of a sense of why Jesus is telling them to keep quiet, to stay quiet. But that's not the only reason. That's not the only reason. Let's keep reading. Verse 31. Then Jesus began to tell them that the Son of Man must suffer many terrible things and be rejected by the elders and leading priests and the teachers of religious law. He would be killed, but 3 days later he would rise from the dead. As he talked about this openly with his disciples, Peter took him aside and he began to reprimand him for saying such things. And Jesus turned around and he looked at his disciples, and then he reprimanded Peter and he said, "Get away from me, Satan," he said. "You're seeing things merely from a human point of view, not from God's." Then, calling the crowd to join his disciples, he said, "If any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way, take up your cross, and follow me." Follow me. So there are a couple things that we see here. And the first thing is this: getting the right words doesn't matter if you don't have the right concept. Right? Peter gets the right words. He calls Jesus the right thing. "You are the Messiah." And Jesus says, "Yeah, you're right." But what does he do? As soon as Jesus starts to talk about being rejected, being killed, and even rising from the dead, Peter doesn't want that, right? Because it doesn't fit within his conception of what the Messiah is going to do. The Messiah is going to show up and he's going to rule. He's going to be powerful. He's going to, live in a palace, and he's going to take Israel and put them on the map again, right? He's going to kick out the Romans. Those are all the things that are in Peter's mind. And guess what Peter's thinking? He's like, and I get to be part of it. Like, I get to be one of Jesus' guys. I get to sit up there on thrones, or I get to be, in charge of, little bits and pieces. I get to be part of this whole thing. And when Jesus starts talking about being killed and rejected and all these other things, he's like, "No, don't say that, Jesus." And Jesus turns around and looks at him and says, "Satan," calls him Satan. Satan literally means accuser. Right? He's doing something that is outside of what Jesus wants to do. And so therefore, Satan is evident in Peter's life. But this applies to the words that we use today. This idea that sometimes we get the right words, but we don't have the right concept to go along with the words. I mean, what do you mean when you say that you are a Christian? If in fact you are a Christian, does it mean that when I follow Jesus, my life will get better? Does it mean that it will make me a better dad or a mom or a child or a friend or an employee? I would say that in many cases, those things are all true. Following Jesus will, in many cases, improve your life. But if you're following Jesus because he benefits you, you're going to be sorely disappointed. And that's what Peter has in mind when he's following Jesus. I follow Jesus because that means a greater benefit for me. But following Jesus does not always look like a great benefit. To follow Jesus means that you give up your way. You give up what benefits you. You take up your cross. That doesn't mean you take up your burden. That's not what it means. It means you are taking up your cross, which is, indicative of death. Like you're willing to die, and you're willing to follow him wherever he might lead you. That's what it means to follow Christ. You see, sometimes we use the right words, but we don't have the right concept in our minds when it comes to following Jesus. Mark's definition of being a Christian or a disciple is Jesus leading us into danger and risk. And you're like, I don't like that. I don't like that at all. But here, if you think about it, following Jesus, it's dangerous. It's dangerous financially because he invites us to give sacrificially, right? It's dangerous financially. It's dangerous relationally because Jesus goes against the grain of society. What does he tell you to do? He tells you to love your enemies. He tells you to pray for those who persecute you. He doesn't go to tell you to blow them out of the water. Like that's the way that our minds work. That's the way that our minds go to that place. When somebody is my enemy, what am I going to do? I'm going to destroy them, or I'm going to fight back against them. But Jesus says, no, you love your enemy. You pray for those who persecute you. You know, you have a thing in mind that is greater than just simply what the here and now and what you can see and what you can touch. Following Jesus is dangerous politically, right? Oftentimes we don't fall into mainstream politics as Jesus followers. And depending on who is in charge, following Jesus can land you in hot water. You know, our allegiance is to Jesus first, before all others. And that can be extremely dangerous, depending on who is in power. So maybe you're asking, well, why? Why would I sign up for that? Why would I follow Jesus? And I'm glad you asked, right? Maybe you weren't asking, but I'll just assume that you were. Why would I sign up for that? And here's why. Jesus tells us exactly why. He says, if you try to hang on to your life, you're going to lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake and for the sake of the good news, you will save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world, but you lose your own soul? It's important to realize soul is not the disembodied spiritual part of you. You don't have a soul, you are a soul. Okay, that's the idea behind the Hebrew idea of a soul. You are a soul. That's your whole entire being. And Jesus is saying, you know, what benefit do you get if you gain the entire world, but you lose your very self? Is anything worth more than your soul or your whole self? He says, if anyone is ashamed of me and my message in these adulterous and sinful days, the Son of Man will be ashamed of that person when he returns in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. You see, the only way to save your life, Jesus says, is to give it up. And that makes sense if you really think about it. Because nobody, this is what my friend Jim Weaver says, nobody gets out of this alive, right? Nobody. I mean, you can try to hold on to your life as hard as you can. You can eat all the right things. You can do all the exercises. You know, you can do everything. You can go to the doctor. You can do all the things. But nobody gets out of this alive. And if you try to hold on to your life, it will slip through your fingers like sand at the beach. You try to pick it up, and you can't. It just flows through your fingers, right? When you try to hold on to your life, it's gone before you know it. You know, I talk to people all the time. You know, I talk to people who are you know, in their 20s, their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, all the way up into their 90s. And, you know, it's always like people who are younger are always like, oh, I got lots of time left. And then I talk to people who are older, and they're like, man, where'd all the time go? It's gone. I don't have any time left. Like, what's going on? You know, you try to hold on to it, and it just goes faster, right? And that's what Jesus is pointing out. He says, if you try to hold on to this life, you're going to lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake and for the good news, you will save it. You get to do something for a world and for a situation that's bigger than you, right? You get to enjoy an eternal reality to your life when you give up that life for the sake of Jesus and for the good news. So I want to invite you all to just take a little bit of time, a second here, and I just want you to close your eyes. This is not going to be a Southern Baptist invitation or anything, but I just want you to close your eyes. If you grew up in the Southern Baptist Church, I'm not at all knocking that. I'm just saying that's not what this is going to be. So just close your eyes. Just close your eyes. And I want you to do a little bit of work with the Lord this morning as you're thinking and as you're wrestling with this message that we read in Mark chapter 8. And I just want to invite you, if you are a Christian, I want you to spend some time this morning just recommitting your life to the Lord. Giving up your life verbally to Him. It's not something that you can do once and not have to do again. It's something that you have to do every day. I just want to invite you to recommit your heart and your life, your soul, your entire being to the Lord. Now, if you're not a Christian, keep your eyes closed, everybody. If you're not a Christian this morning, if you have not committed your life to Christ, my hope is that you will have a conversation this morning with God, with Jesus, about how to make Him the King of your life, the Messiah. Think about what takes your focus. Think about your priorities. Think about what demands your time. And my invitation to you is that you don't leave this morning without seriously considering making Jesus your King and having Him be the one who calls the shots, who directs your feet, guides your hands, your thoughts, your words. And if you're in a place where you are making that commitment this morning, my hope is that you won't leave here without letting somebody know. Without letting somebody know that that is your decision. Talk to somebody that you trust in this room, whether it's me or whether it's somebody else. Okay, you can open your eyes. Is Jesus King of your life? Is He King? Is He Lord? Is He King of your heart? Does He guide you? Does He direct you? That's really the invitation. And the reason that Jesus is telling everybody to be quiet is, first of all, it's a dangerous message. But second of all, they don't really understand yet what it means for Him to be the King. But now that we know the story, and we know that Jesus was not there to set up a geographical kingdom. Hi, Violet. Do you want to come in and see? Did she escape? I don't know. I don't remember where I was. Anyway, make Jesus the King of your life. That's the point, right? All right, let's stand. Let's sing together.